Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
America's export of soybeans helps the U.S. maintain a positive agricultural trade balance. Nebraska contributes half of its soybeans for export. The protein and oil content in soybeans enhance the growing demand for higher protein diets. The Nebraska Soybean Board promotes research to develop new soybean varieties with higher protein and oil content for major agricultural markets. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Market Journal, television for making agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. This week, Roy Smith is our grain marketing analyst. Tina Barrett joins us to talk about how drought will affect farm incomes. We'll look at increasing soybean yield with Greg Kruger, and Dave Aiken will update us on irrigation plans involving the Platte River. Harvest in August is underway in Nebraska. The latest Nebraska Crops Progress Report showed 4% of the state's corn had been harvested as of Sunday. The first portion of Nebraska soybeans was also starting to drop leaves. For those who are combining corn, you may have noticed a black soot-like dust kicking up as you pass through the field. Before we get to Roy Smith, we asked UNL Extension plant pathologist Tamra Jackson-Ziems to explain the cause.
In the last week, we've had a lot of questions about black sooty dust coming out of combines during harvest. And I just want to give everyone an update that what they're seeing for the most part are fungal spores that have come out and really exploded after the last week's rain that we had. And these are good fungi, not acting as pathogens, more so as saprophytes on the dead plant tissue. And after the last rain, they produced massive amounts of spores, and that's what people are seeing that looks like smoke. In addition, these are not likely to cause illness to humans unless you're prone to respiratory problems. And so I recommend wearing a dust mask or a respirator if you're concerned about it.
Our market analyst this week is Roy Smith. We talked with Roy on Wednesday afternoon and covered basis price, strategies for this year's crop, and the potential for a large soybean output in South America. We began by looking at the crop conditions around the Plattsmouth area.
Well, we started on Monday harvesting some corn, and was a little bit surprised. It's pretty dry for being in August. We got a little rain the last weekend, and so that's has kind of kept the soybeans green, and hopefully, put some weight in those pods. There's not a lot of pods out there, but there are some. And it's not going to be a total wipeout, but it's better than we thought maybe that would be, a month ago.
As we shift into the markets, this year is absolutely unique. I know you do a lot of historical work, so historically, are the trends following what you thought they might?
Well, anytime we get what I call a worldwide cataclysmic event, like a major drought, or in this case right now a hurricane, although that's not major worldwide, you expect the prices to trend up through the summer, and they have. Now, one of the things that I watch is what I call the August low, and the August low this year was scheduled to be on August 20th, and in fact, right after the 20th, on the 21st, we had a big jump in soybean prices, and right now, the close on Wednesday of this week was 69 cents over what the price was on the 20th of August, so that feature of the historical charts is holding true, and something for people to watch.
I know one thing you look at is the September crop report, which comes out September 12th, and selling maybe before it. Are you still looking at that this year?
Historically, year in and year out, the day before or 2 days before the September crop report has been a good time to make sales. Now, you have to temper that this year with the question mark about what kind of yields you're going to have, because obviously you're not going to want a forward contract if you're not sure you've got the grain to sell. So, but yes, especially irrigated farmers, but also those who have some crop, as I do, you need to look at that September crop report and maybe make a sale a day or two before that.
The last time we had talked, you mentioned you didn't have any corn contracted out for this growing season, but you had a little beans. What's your strategy here as you start to take it out of the field?
Well, I'm putting the corn in the bin right now because we need to get it dried and kind of get the condition normalized. And but we're going to be looking at maybe making some sales of corn here before too long. Beans, I've got about 25% of my crop forward priced from a much lower price back last spring, and I won't do anything on beans till I see how many more I'm going to have than what I've sold. Right now, I'd say it's kind of questionable.
What are you seeing in basis numbers here?
The basis has been real good up until about a week ago, and then coinciding with the beginning of getting some new crop corn in the elevators, we saw the basis slide off pretty bad, and you normally expect that. You don't like to see it, but it happens pretty often. And so I'd say my strategy going into this thing is to go ahead and put the grain in the bin. And I'm thinking the basis is probably going to narrow up pretty drastically when you've got to realize we're almost 2 months ahead of time on harvest. Once or twice in my career, I combined corn in August, and it really didn't go very well. But this year, we're combining corn in August, and I'm going to be almost done with mine, and it's worked very well. So
I know you were talking about some of the grain already. I should have mentioned this. You're also looking at the crop insurance and maybe trying to protect yourself a little bit there.
Well, we have to consider that the price is set for crop insurance in October, basically the average for the month of October. And that's at risk right now, because if it stays where it is, we're going to see potential for a big payoff in the crop insurance. So you want to look at that differential between fall and spring in both corn and beans, and the differential is something over $4 in beans and over $2 in corn. And if that looks good to you, you may want to lock some of that in, either using the futures or options or some kind of a cash strategy.
I want to quickly ask you about South America. What do you expect to see as we get into 2013 and they start to pull a crop, specifically soybeans, out down there? What do you expect to see that do to this market here?
I think that they're going to plant a huge crop of soybeans. There isn't any question about it. I mean, $19 or $17 beans looks attractive to everybody except people that are buying it. So we need to be wary of that crop comes in the spring of 2013. And so, we could see the highest price of the year here come in the dead cat bounce shortly after harvest in the United States, and then trend down going into the spring. No guarantees, but that looks like a high probability.
Next week, we'll look at hog markets with Ron Plain. With the current farm bill set to expire September 30th, Reuters says about 40 farm and agriculture-related organizations have formed a group called Farm Bill Now. They plan to hold a rally near the U.S. Capitol on September 12th, 2 days after lawmakers return to session. While only some of the farm bill is directly related to crop insurance, critics of that portion argue payments are too large. That increased this week as the USDA forecasted 2012 net farm income at $122.2 billion, up 3.7% from last year. Tina Barrett from Nebraska Farm Business joined us earlier this week to talk about that possibility.
I think it's possible. I think there's several factors that could hold that. Crop insurance is certainly going to help because we're going to see some yield loss. But if you just do a quick little math, if we were you were expecting 200 bushels in the spring and we thought we were going to get $6 for it, and you end up with 75% crop insurance and you end up with 150 bushels at $8, it comes out at about exactly the same. So, we could end up with the same amount of gross income that we're expecting in the spring, even though everything has changed since then.
And that's one of the things that opponents of crop insurance have to bring to the forefront. They say that farmers are going to make out okay even in a drought year.
Yeah.
Is that a fair comparison or a fair argument?
Yeah, I hope the point of crop insurance is that they come out okay in a bad year, because that's why they spend the money that they do and the premiums year after year. Maybe making a profit wasn't the point, but there's so many things that go into this, the price protection and the price increase over the year was something that we couldn't have predicted, and had that not happened, we wouldn't even be close to seeing that profit in there. So it's as much a factor of the yield protection from crop insurance, but also the fact that prices are just gone up, just like it does in any year.
The farmers you work with, do most of them have crop insurance or irrigation?
Yeah, the majority of the producers that I work with do. There's a few irrigated producers who don't take crop insurance with the mentality that they're, for the most part, being able to control that they will have production. There are a few dryland producers who don't take it as well. Most of them do that with the idea that a year like this was coming, but if they can spread that out over 10 years, what they save in premiums will offset the loss that they see this year. So they have been basically self-insuring, and in a healthy enough financial position that they're not being required to take crop insurance by a bank. And it may be that they take it the next year because they can't stand 2 years in a row like that.
What about the input costs that these farmers face, whether it be fertilizer or the irrigation itself?
Yeah, we certainly saw input prices increase as far as seed and fertilizer went for 2012. The irrigation costs are going to be off the charts, way more than what we've experienced. And we've had some low years in the past, so we might end up averaging with a good 3 or 5 year average. But the fact that those irrigated producers are still able to harvest something came at an extreme cost in fuel cost.
Let's move to livestock producers, because they're probably not going to be among those that are making record incomes.
Right. And I think they're going to be the proof of what crop insurance has done to support the crop side of things, because they're dealing with extremely high feed costs now, and with the potential of being very short on feed availability. And so those things could become a huge issue for them probably going forward into next year, more so than what we're going to see this year.
Looking at Nebraska and the irrigation in Nebraska probably has a benefit that not many other states have, in that they can produce a lot with a lot of irrigation. Not many other states can do that.
Right, and as I talk with people, my colleagues around the Midwest, we think about things that we're still going to have that other states won't. We're still going to be able to have crop to sell. We're going to have feed to give to the cattle. It's going to be more expensive. We're going to have ethanol byproducts because we're going to have the crop to do things with. Or in other states, they don't have the crop. The crop insurance is going to cover the crop producer, but the livestock producers won't even have that ability to have that crop. So, I think there's something definitely different and beneficial we have in Nebraska.
What's the mentality of the farmers that you're working with as we go through this drought, and they say day after day after day pass without rain, and temperatures now again this week in the 90s?
I think, in all my years, I've seen very low prices and farmers be optimistic through that. And we've seen increases in input costs, and they can still be optimistic in that. But when they can't produce something, when they can't do the one thing that they feel they have control over, that's when I see that mentality come down, and that maybe not necessarily depression, but certainly that optimism disappear. So.
Many farmers and ranchers across the state have been forced to cull cattle because of the ongoing drought. At the Goodmanson Sandhills Lab open house last week, we talked with Matt Stockton about the tough decisions, whether it be selling part of the herd or pricing expensive feed, that farmers and ranchers have had to make in order to weather the storm.
Well, it's a stressful time in a business, like any time, and there's basically two kinds of decisions that can happen. Those that you have to make and forced to make instantly, and those that perhaps you have some time and you can see things coming down the road. Those that you can see coming down the road, generally you can make better decisions because you have time to think about it, consider a lot of different alternatives, and choose among alternatives. Those decisions that you have to make or are forced to make or in a bad situation, generally you just have to do what you have to do, and you don't count the costs, and so in some cases that could cost you your business. So you want to really try to anticipate making decisions in a period of drought. You want to make it calmly, and you want to evaluate as many options as you can in an appropriate way. So in other words, if you're going to buy feed, okay, what's the feed going to cost me? How long have I got to feed it? And what's the outcome, what I'm going to sell the cattle for? So in other words, if you find out you're going to lose $400,000 and you've only got $300,000, you're kind of in a bad way.
As we are right now, as we're already into the drought by a few months, are there still decisions to be made, or are those limited?
Well, no, of course, they're more limited than they were 3 months ago. But there's still a lot of, the drought is only, we're only halfway through, well, we're more than halfway, but we still have grazing season time left. There's still decisions to be made. Obviously not as many options as you had a while back, and obviously the longer you wait, the less your options are going to become, especially if your finances are limiting or whatever.
Matt is also doing research at the Goodmanson Lab on the economics of calving seasons. You can see that information in the extended interview on the Market Journal website. Husker Harvest Days is around the corner. In its biggest edition of the year, the Nebraska Farmer explains in depth what will happen at the show from September 11th through the 13th. The 35th annual Husker Harvest Days will be held at its permanent site, 6 miles west of Grand Island. The Nebraska Farmer sponsors Husker Harvest Days. All crops there are irrigated and will be ready for harvest demonstrations during the show. Market Journal will again be at Husker Harvest Days this year as part of the UNL Beef exhibit on 3rd Street. At the Soybean Management Field Day in David City last week, Greg Kruger presented on the efficiency of pesticides and maximizing soybean yield. In Greg's soybean research plots in Brule, yields reached as high as 99 bushels per acre, with yield monitors often registering above 100 over short distances. We started by asking what he's looking for when trying to maximize yield.
It's really making sure that we have the whole system set up right. Today we're talking about row spacing, plant population, and relative maturity group of soybean varieties. But it really just starts there. We also need to be talking about appropriate fertility practices, pest management and timely pest management, as well as making sure that we've got the right agronomic systems, including crop rotation and things like that.
This is a study that's just beginning this year?
We're just starting, so this is all brand new data for us. We certainly have based a lot of the stuff we're doing off of past work from other states and stuff, but we're going to see how things work in Nebraska.
What are your hunches, or I guess what are the variations that you're trying in some of these?
So one of the things I think has a lot of potential is narrow row spacing. We see a lot of 30-inch rows in Nebraska, but we believe that there's a potential to increase yields if we go to a 15 or even a 7.5-inch row spacing, based on work that we've seen out of Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, and some of our eastern counterparts.
So what's the thought process there? Because of
part of it is making sure that we get early canopy closure. The quicker that canopy closes, the more we're maximizing the available light, and by maximizing that available light, we're getting more photosynthesis, so we have greater yield potential there.
On plant populations, what numbers are you looking at?
This year we've got 2 locations, one in North Platte and one in Meade, that we've got 50,000, 100, 150, 200, and 250,000 seeds per acre. And then we've got the 4 soybean management field day sites where we're looking at the 100, 150, and 200,000 seeds per acre. So we've got a range of different plant populations. When we talk about yield potential, the yield potential seems to go up and up with these higher populations, at least to 175 or 200,000 based on reports in the literature. But the one thing we got to be real cautious of is, in talking about 100 bushel beans or 300 bushel corn or anything like that, is talking about yield, the maximum yield possible, and the economic optimal yields. So the literature would suggest that even though we're going up in the yields are going up with populations going up to 175 or 200,000 seeds per acre, that economic threshold is probably closer to around 125 or 130,000 seeds per acre.
Let's move into the pesticide application. Now, this is actually testing that you started last year at Soybean Management Field Days, yes?
We had a study looking at fine, medium, coarse, and extremely coarse spray qualities, as well as looking at several different pesticides or herbicides. We were looking at Roundup, first rate, dicamba, and Select Max for our study, and we found that very interestingly, the Select Max or those ACCase inhibitors have a ideal droplet size that's very different from what the ideal droplet size for glyphosate applications are. Past reports in the literature and then work that we've done here at the University of Nebraska suggest that the droplet size really doesn't make much difference for Roundup applications, and so we've always pushed guys to use larger droplets because there's less drift potential there. But some of this new stuff would suggest, looking at the ACCase inhibitors, that we really need to be in that fine to medium coarse or medium spray quality to make sure that we maximize the efficacy of those particular products. So we may have to bring guys back down a little bit smaller to really get the best out of those products.
We'll have more from the Soybean Management Field Day on next week's show with Nebraska Soybean Board District 3 Director Richard Bartek. In May, the Central Platte and Twin Platte Natural Resources Districts proposed a plan to increase Platte River flows by substituting irrigation wells for irrigation water from Lake McConaughey. UNL Extension Ag and Water Law Specialist Dave Aiken joined us on Thursday to discuss the plan.
Basically, they want to put in between 400 and 450 irrigation wells in the area that's irrigated in the Central District, and have those people go off using water from Lake McConaughey and use irrigation water from the wells instead.
And what are they hoping to accomplish? What's the goal here?
Well, the water that's in Lake McConaughey could be used to meet in-stream flow requirements for endangered species, and then during the non-irrigation season they would also run water from Lake McConaughey through the irrigation canals to try to recharge the groundwater supplies. But there are some drawbacks. Not all the land that's being irrigated from canal water in the Central District, they don't all necessarily have good enough groundwater for an irrigation well. So that's a problem. A lot of the land is rented, and so if you're talking about going from surface water to groundwater and a center pivot and a new well and all that stuff, that may be tough in a lease situation where you got to get the landlord and the tenant to agree to everything and stuff like that.
Certainly irrigators, I would assume, would be hesitant to switch to from something that they know works.
Well, and they have some of the best water rights in the surface water rights in the state of Nebraska, and I would not be real anxious about trading those in for something else. So but for me, the big issue is what I call the donut hole in Nebraska water law.
The donut hole being?
Well, in Nebraska, if stream flows are low and irrigation wells are depleting the stream, we don't do any. We let the irrigation wells continue to pump even though the stream is being dried up. So
Nebraska law doesn't deal with that then?
We do not. We try to prevent it. Our law in terms of fully appropriated streams. The Department of Natural Resources does the study every year on all the river basins in the state, and if it looks like there's going to be a problem with wells drying up streams in the future, then they cut off new wells. But that's as far as it goes.
Anytime we talk about water rights, I think you immediately flash to the Republican River in Nebraska versus Kansas. How does this issue compare, or does it compare?
It's very comparable. The Central District is basically like the surface water users in Kansas who are complaining about groundwater pumpers in Nebraska drying up their stream flow. Here, the groundwater pumpers drying up the Platte River or contributing to reduced stream flow in the Platte River are the Nebraska groundwater pumpers in the Platte Basin. So it's a very comparable type of situation. But they're doing a lot more about it in Kansas because of the compact. In Kansas, on the Republican, we've cut off new wells. Irrigators are limited in terms of what they pump, and they don't get to pump all they want. And in dry years, they have to do extra things like shut down wells close to the river and buy surface water from irrigators to send it to Kansas and stuff like that.
Aiken says it's important to remember that this is just a proposal, and we may be talking about the issue for years to come. Now here's UNL Extension State Climatologist Al Dutcher to forecast the coming week.
Well, folks, here we are again for the weekly forecast. Of course, this is the start of the long holiday weekend, and there's been several climatic items in the news. First of all was Hurricane Isaac that made landfall earlier in the week just to the southwest of New Orleans, and is slowly making its way up through Missouri and expected to be a pretty significant precipitation maker for much of the central and eastern Corn Belt. Unfortunately, it doesn't appear that it's going to be having any impact on Nebraska. For Nebraska proper, in this last 7 days, the big news was, of course, the precipitation last weekend that hit northern portions of Kansas and then swung up through southeastern Nebraska into southwest Iowa, where we had precipitation totals in the extreme southeastern corner anywhere from 2.5 inches up to 5 inches. But moving northwest of that area, we really didn't see much significant moisture outside of a thin area from essentially in the Hastings area up towards Central City, where we did have inch to inch and a half totals. But overall, at least we've seen a significant event for a portion of the state, but we're still missing that broad-based coverage. And it appears that the dry lightning strikes that occurred across the panel that has resulted in some of the grassland fires up in the northern panhandle, we may have to deal with that issue for a couple more days before we start to see some significantly cooler weather start to work its way in during the midweek. Let's take a look at the upper air models and see what we can expect as we go through this next 7-day period. And I'll draw your attention. Here's the center of what's left of Hurricane Isaac. It is expected to make a right-hand turn over the next 24 hours and bring heavy precipitation to the eastern corn belt. Might get a little bit of this in southeastern Nebraska, but overall we are expecting a fairly dry day across most of the state. Very warm conditions. We'll be looking at highs around 93 across extreme eastern Nebraska to potentially near 100 across western Nebraska, where we're closer to the core center of this upper air ridge. Now, as we go into tomorrow, we're going to see that the remnants of Isaac are starting to fall apart as they move toward the eastern seaboard, but also notice another trough starting to work in, and that's going to bring some slightly cooler weather to the northwestern corner of the state, looking at possibly highs in the mid-80s, extreme northwestern corner. As you get into deep southern Nebraska, you'd be looking more around to 100 degrees. Now, as we get into Monday, we're going to see that trough makes its way to the Great Lakes. The ridge is trying to flatten out and bring a little bit cooler conditions across extreme northern Nebraska, with everybody sitting right around the upper 80s to low 90s. Across southern Nebraska, we're going to still be right around the 100-degree mark, and the real cool conditions start to materialize as we get into Tuesday. The monsoonal moisture is going to wrap around this ridge, and we see a couple pieces of energy moving around that ridge that may generate some thunderstorm activity as we get into the day Tuesday, and it will carry on through Wednesday. We'll be looking at highs in northeast Nebraska around 85 to around 97 across portions of southeast Nebraska. Now, as we get into Wednesday, this trough's going to dig a little bit farther, bring cooler air in. So we may be looking at highs at around 75 in the northeastern part of the state to around 90 across deep southern Nebraska, southwestern Nebraska. As we go into Thursday, cold air moves in a little bit closer. We'll be looking at highs to 70 northeast to 85 to the southwest. And as we get into Friday, much cooler conditions, 67 for a high northeast to around 80 for a high in the west. 8 to 14-day forecast indicates cool conditions will continue, and actually indicating that we might be in for a period of above normal precipitation as that trough lingers around the central Midwest.
Thanks, Al. The Market Journal photo contest is still open until September 7th. You can download the Market Journal mobile app and submit a soybean-related photo for your chance to win an iPad. Rules and directions can be found on the Market Journal website. Current photo submissions are on our Facebook page. Next week, Ron Plain will be our marketing analyst, and we'll talk with Nebraska Soybean Board District 3 Director Richard Bartek. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
A diesel-powered engine on a farm works hard and operates in a grueling environment. Soy biodiesel fuels stand up to the challenge of powering farm equipment, but are also renewable and environmentally responsible as well. The Nebraska Soybean Board is committed to encouraging the use of soy biodiesel to protect the environment and sustain Nebraska's agriculture. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.